October 30th, 1974. Here it is, Big Dan. 50 years since the Rumble in the Jungle, with the late Muhammad Ali knocking out George Foreman to reclaim the heavyweight title in Zaire, Africa. Rafael says, I view as the single most famous fight in boxing history. Tough to argue. Keeping in mind that many people believe George Foreman was going to do to Ali what Michael Bent did to Tommy Morrison, like in a round or two. What he had done to Joe Frazier, previously Foreman, what he had done to Ken Norton, what he had done to others. And yet the greatest had other ideas, including we learned what the all-time rope-a-dope is for that fight, Dan Rafael.
Listen, George Foreman at that time, and there's a million documentaries about it, and it's been written about, and there's all kinds of talking heads you can find about it. The When We Were Kings documentary is based on this fight and the music festival that was there that Don King got involved with when they were doing this fight card. But George Foreman at that time was considered invincible, kind of like the days when Tyson was fighting before he fought Buster Douglas, like indestructible, a devastating knockout machine. He had knocked out Joe Frazier, easily splattered him in 2 rounds. Down goes Frazier, the famous call from Howard Cosell. That was in 1973, January of 1973. He had defended the title in Japan against Jose Roman. KO 1. Took him all of 2 minutes to get rid of Jose Roman. Not a top opponent, but devastating nonetheless. Then he went to Venezuela in the matchup against Kenny Norton, who was a top heavyweight at that time, and he destroyed him, knocked him down 3 times, stopped him in the second round. Now you're like, oh my God, this guy knocked out Joe Frazier, who, remember, Joe had defeated Muhammad Ali. He blew out Roman in 1 round. He destroyed another top guy in Kenny Norton in 2 rounds. And now you have Ali, who was getting another opportunity to fight for the title. As great as he was, nobody really gave him a chance to win because they were thinking about where he was in his career. Remember, he had the time off because of what had occurred in terms of the not going to Vietnam. He had come back. He had suffered a loss. He had had a few fights, but eventually in 73, he suffered the loss by split decision to Kenny Norton. He defeated him by split decision in the rematch. A couple of fights later, he had defeated Joe Frazier in their rematch. These are all non-title fights. But still, people were like, okay, if Frazier beat you, how are you going to deal with George Foreman, who was destroying not only Frazier, but also Kenny Norton, who also beat you? And when you did beat him again, it wasn't like a blowout. You had a really hard time beating Kenny Norton when you fought him again. And so therefore, this was like, there was no chance that Ali was going to win. Now, of course, the backdrop to the deal was how they secured the money to make the fight, dealing with the president of Zaire, Mobutu, and Don King and Bob Arum's involvement in trying to get they're both trying to make the fight. King, promises them $5 million a piece. Doesn't know, he gets an assignment. Now he's got to find the money. That's Don's style. Like, get the deal signed and then figure out how you're going to do it later. And that's why the fight wound up in Zaire. Now, remember also, the fight got postponed by 6 weeks because George Foreman, I think it was 6 weeks, George Foreman suffered a cut in sparring.
Correct.
And they didn't let him leave.
Right.
They didn't let him leave because they were afraid he wouldn't.
Well, and as the story goes, and Angelo Dundee backed this up, Ali never really talked a ton about it, but Angelo Dundee has frequently, the late Angie Dundee said, the reason that fight stayed on is because Ali went and convinced George Foreman, we have to do this fight. We have so much riding on it for both of us, financially and otherwise. It's a homecoming here in Africa. We have to do this fight. Because there was real concern that if Foreman came back to the United States, they were not going to do the fight. That Foreman might
he wasn't
go fight
going to go
somebody
back
else.
to Zaire.
Right.
Yeah.
Wouldn't go back to Zaire. The money would never be there then. So Ali did some brokering, some finessing to keep George in Africa. The cut healed. And then they held this fight in the middle of the night in Africa. So it could still be late night in the United States. Closed circuit, go to a movie theater, go to a ballroom and watch it. And
just to clarify, the original date of this fight was September 24th of 73. They ended up getting postponed until October 30th because of the cut.
There you go. And so they have the fight.
74, by the way, not 73.
74. And they have the fight. And amazingly, Ali, who had not, and this is confirmed by Dundee, Ali had not shared with anybody what this strategy was going to be of lay on the ropes and let Foreman wail on you and then lean on Foreman, lean on the back of his head, try to wear him down. The rope-a-dope. And Dundee is repeatedly, you can hear it on the TV audio a couple times, screaming at him, get off the ropes, get off the ropes. He didn't even know.
Yeah.
And Ali knew. Ali knew what he was doing, Big Dan.
And when he finally stopped George Foreman in the 8th round, and George has talked about this in the past. I've heard him talk about it. I know I actually personally spoke to him about this at one point when I was doing a thing with George where I was like taking George's, I was ghostwriting something for George about his relationship with Angelo. Because remember, Angelo Dundee was Muhammad Ali's trainer for the fight and for all of those fights and was in the opposite corner. When George came back, when he, after being retired for 10 years and was making another march to win the heavyweight title, he went out and got Angelo Dundee to be in his corner because he wanted, he respected him so much for what he did with Ali when Ali beat him. So him and I were having this lengthy conversation about Angelo Dundee's meaning for his own career. But the point is that in that fight, he'll admit to you that, yeah, Ali obviously caught him with some good punches and dropped him in the 8th round. I've always questioned whether or not he beat the count because I always kind of thought he got up before the 10, but the ref waved it off. The referee, Zach Clayton. But nonetheless, George was more mentally broken than physically broken than that. Because even though he got knocked down, I never got the impression he was badly hurt. And George, matter of fact, if you look at the video, he got up off the deck and he basically just kind of walked away. It wasn't like he was limping or out of it.
I thought he was exhausted. I thought he was done, maybe mentally. That's it. Ali got to me, and that's it.
That's a big part of it, though. Mental, talk to any fighter, they'll tell you that the mental part of being a professional boxer, or even an amateur boxer, is a huge part of the whole thing as far as what you can do. So George, though, he just could not deal with that, and he was embarrassed by it. And he fought a few more times, obviously after that for sure, and then he ended up retiring for the 10 years. And I've always found this to be like one of the single most remarkable things that you could ever think about as a footnote in boxing is that when George came back, and he had the loss to Tommy Morrison, he had lost the title fight to then undisputed champion Evander Holyfield. When he was coming near the end of the career, he got yet another opportunity against Michael Moore. And of course, it happened from Jim Lampley. He had lost every round. He comes through and he scores a one-punch knockout and wins the heavyweight championship, the lineal title, the man who beat the man who beat the man, etc. He did it almost 20 years to the day after the Rumble in the Jungle where he lost the title to Ali. And he was wearing the same trunks against Moore that he had worn against Ali in the Rumble in the Jungle. That was, at that time, 20 years prior to when they fought that fight.
Bookends and in the same trunks.
And so I say this also, and this is, you can find copious amounts of documentary and writing about the Rumble in the Jungle. I have said to you and others a million times, to me, this is the single most famous fight in the history of boxing, period. End of story. Any other Ali fight, any like Jack Johnson or famous, early times of boxing fight or anything involving any of the modern stars or anything, Sugar Ray Leonard or, the big four, the four kings. This was a global event. They estimate that some over 1 billion people watched this fight, even bigger in my mind in terms of the name value of the fight, because especially with the result of Ali regaining the title, I still would put it in terms of the overall bigness, let's say, than even the first fight between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier. I mean, that caliber of a fight, and maybe that's number 2 on the list. Certainly, as history has looked back on it, I think it's become a bigger fight than Ali and Frazier, and it's a very interesting fight because of the crazy strategy that Ali employed with the rope-a-dope, where he laid on the ropes and let this big, strong knockout machine pulverize him, and he had to be able to take the punches. It's not the type of style that most fighters could employ because most fighters can't take the heat for that sustained amount of punishment that Ali took. He paid a toll for it later.
The subtle tactical thing that he did that now is basically outlawed and enforced much more is he kept grabbing Foreman behind the neck, behind the head, and pulling his neck and pulling his head down over and over and over again, trying to wear on him, lean on him, and wear him down, in addition to the windmilling that Foreman did with the punches along the ropes. An incredible, I mean, it's Hollywood-esque, and Will Smith again portrayed it as Ali, and it's interesting because the movie ends with that as the final clinching scene, him winning in the Rumble in the Jungle. But you mentioned, was it George Plimpton's documentary, and there have been other documentaries too. That tells you about the historical significance of Rumble in the Jungle.
Yeah, I don't know about George
This
Plimpton. What did he do with that?
George Plimpton had the, what was it, When We Were Kings or
Oh, I didn't
something?
realize that he was part of that. But okay.
His documentary, right, and others, and it was that big of a deal back in
And like you said, part of the
1974.
mystique of it is because locally in Zaire, it was literally 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah,
Because there was the money in the United States was on the closed circuit that had to be done at a time where people could be in the movie theaters and be in the closed circuit locations. And just a huge, I mean, there's nobody that never heard of the Rumble in the Jungle. Even if they
agreed.
don't necessarily know who the fighters were in it, you've heard the phrase
The
Rumble in the
sad
Jungle.
part is, like, the Gen Zers, the under 30-year-olds now, this is so long ago now that they need to catch up, need to go to YouTube, need to Google it, need to look at it. But if you call yourself a fight fan and you're like our age or a little younger, etc., this is the most noteworthy fight. I would agree. Hagler Hearns for the result is probably well-known result, but you're talking about historical significance and all-time the greatest and the greatest moment is this fight, is the Rumble in the Jungle. You and I would agree on that.